This episode is sponsored by Angular Dev Summit, coming September 11th through the 18th, 2017. Hi, it's Chuck from devchat.tv. I reached out to some of my friends in the Angular community to put on a completely free, no-travel conference for Ruby developers. We have speakers like Rob Wormald, Jeff Welpley, and others coming to speak about all kinds of topics in Angular. So if you're trying to learn Angular or you're trying to level up Angular, come check it out. The talks are happening throughout the day each day, and we'll have a chat available during each session. Attending the talks is free, but you need to register. Go to angulardevsummit.com. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My JS Story. This week we're talking to Matt Creager. Matt, do you want to say hi?
Hey Chuck. Hello everybody.
So Matt works for an interesting company called Manifold. They're actually a sponsor of the show, but he's got an interesting JavaScript story, and I think also just the entrepreneurship side is something that I hear about frequently, but we don't always talk about on the show. So, a lot of things to dive into here. But, I don't know if you have more you want to say as far as an introduction or anything.
No, I think that's pretty good. Where do you want to kick it off? How far back into my sordid childhood do you want to go?
Let's go ahead and jump in on where you got started programming.
Oh boy, we have to go way back into my memories, I guess. Yeah. So I was born 1984. The Mac launched in 1984. I tell you that the Mac and I grew up together, but I was a PC guy until only a few years ago. My dad was a dentist in the British military, so we were moving about once a year until I was 12 or 13.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of that time, I was a pretty solitary kid. I was running around in the forest, and before I fell in love with programming, I sort of fell in love with technology. My grandparents bought me a Game Boy, and I was like, I was married to that thing. Like, I just loved my Game Boy. I'd never put it down. They also bought me my first computer. It wasn't my computer. It was my dad's computer. It was a Gateway 2000. I don't know if you remember the Gateways, but they had like the cow print boxes. And I think I got access to internet around the same time. So I was like 12 or 13, and it came through CompuServe, which I think was the first major commercial online internet provider.
Right.
So I was playing on Usenet, and I was sending email as if I was my dad pretty early on. And I'm not sure whether he was attempting to encourage me or if he just couldn't keep me away from the thing. It's too far back to remember. But I spent all of my time on that computer, and because we were moving around so much, that kind of became the way that I stayed in touch with people. Eventually, we immigrated to Canada, where I live now. So I'm from the east coast of Canada, Halifax, Nova Scotia, and that was where I did most of my growing up. And at that point, I think my dad considered the computer like a necessity, so he kept it in the house. And I remember like taking it apart, him coming in and freaking out at me. I remember formatting the hard drive accidentally, and him actually just buying a replacement because he couldn't figure out how to put it back together again and get the operating system running.
Oh man.
Yeah, good times. I remember getting a second phone line and just so that my parents could make a phone call because I was always on the internet. I don't know. It's like it's all the small things that I think kind of led up to it. But I had a friend, one of my friend's older brothers, and it's amazing how small things over time, 20 years later, how much that one little gesture mattered. I was over at his house, and he'd gotten a game for Christmas that he wasn't interested in playing because he was a console guy. It was called Ultima Online, and it was one of the first massively multiplayer online games.
Uh-huh.
And somehow I managed to talk my uncle and my cousin, who were both in the UK at this point. So we've left the UK. We're in Canada, and I have really nothing in common with them anymore. And this game became a conduit to like my family in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my uncle, he's been in the IT industry since he was a kid too. He was switching tapes. Every time that you go to the bank machine and you use your debit card, there is a part of that code base, the original code base that my uncle contributed. That's his claim to fame. So he my cousin and I, we were playing this game all the time, and he couldn't keep up with us. So he decided that he was going to start scripting his character's actions. And, you know, he was essentially cheating in this game, but I was just, like, I was in awe of this. Like, I got a glimpse at the wizard behind the curtain, and I kind of became obsessed with becoming the wizard. Like, I wanted to understand how he was doing this magic. And now, looking back, I know that it was Lua, some combination of Lua and C++. But at the time, I had no idea. So I just kind of started taking his scripts apart and using them to automate my own character in the game. And like, man, I was 13, 14. I was skipping school. I was staying up all night. Like, this was a obsession for me. My first programming book I bought as a result of not being able to figure out how to get my character to do what it wanted. It was one of the C++ Bibles. And then I became active in the forums around the scripting language. So I was helping other people write these scripts, and I was sharing the scripts that I wrote. And it became, anybody that's familiar with MMOs knows that, like, there's a cash market outside of the game. So at this, like, age, I started to realize that I could harvest stuff in the game and sell it for real life cash.
Right.
So yeah, man, that was my first encounter. And to be honest with you, in the real world, things weren't going so hot. My mom and dad were in the process of splitting up, and as part of that process, we lost our home. My mother moved back to the UK. This is getting personal. This got personal fast.
Yeah, I did.
My mother moved back to the UK to attend school, and me and my brother and sister, we moved in with the Wicked Witch of the West, my stepmother at the time, and my father. And so I was kind of acting out. I started to use these skills to cause havoc at school. I was helping kids cheat on keyboarding tests, and I launched a Whereas site called War Whereas that was successful enough that it got noticed, and of course I got in a little bit of trouble for it. And so it was kind of like, to call the situation volatile would be an understatement. It was like, you know, the cops sort of stepped in at one point and were like, you have to shut this website down. And, you know, I had the principal calling my parents and saying, hey, your son's suspended for helping these kids cheat on this test. And it wasn't too long after that my grandparents in the UK got sick, and my dad ended up going back to live in the UK and left my sister with me. So at that point, I was in school. I'm in university at this point, and I'm working at Future Shop, telling people about computers on the evenings and weekends, and I'm waiting tables on the side just to kind of get by. And my computer just languished. Like, I don't know, I associated it with the trouble that I'd been in, and I just didn't touch it for a few years. I focused on school and kind of just getting my own life in order.
Huh. That's quite the story.
Man, oh man, that's not the end of it, I guess. Yeah.
Coding as a coping mechanism, but
absolutely.
You know,
no, I think it is.
I mean, at the same time, it's, you know, I don't know. I mean, it seems normal. You know, you go to something that you can control.
Yeah.
And anyway, it's really interesting, you know, that, yeah, I mean, most of the time it's like, yeah, it was really interesting, and so I decided that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life, is the story I hear when people find it about the age you did. And, you know, it's like, it almost sounds like it was this way of just taking control of your life and, you know, feeling like there was something that you could do.
Yeah, I mean, it gave me a conduit to a role model in my uncle.
Yep.
You know, and he was somebody who was stable. When I went to get my first job, I mean, honestly, I haven't thought about this for 20 years probably, but when I went to get my first job, I was just flat broke. Family had all left. And this job I had an opportunity to get, I needed a car to do it. And I called my uncle and I was like, hey, listen, I need $1,000 deposit for this car. And he came through for me. And it was like, that is my uncle to me. You know, he's that person in my life who, every time everything else is going a little crazy, he steps up. And I always associated spending time on my computer programming with him and that role model. So it was always, it's definitely a stabilizer in my life for sure. And I never considered myself technical. I never considered programming a career. I didn't look at it when I finished school. I was working at Future Shop, which in the US is a lot like Best Buy, and I got comfortable chatting with people, getting out of my comfort zone. And that was kind of the first place I think I started to build like interpersonal skills. And I was just translating CPU and RAM into something meaningful for people who were shopping for computers, right? And it was like, I started there, and then I wanted to measure my own performance, and I wanted to help other people measure theirs. So I built tools that took the data we had in head office and turned it into reports. And the manager started using that. It became a nationwide program, and suddenly I was kind of on the map at FutureShop, and I was leading a team. And it wasn't until FutureShop started to kind of, it was FutureShop, so it was a stepping stone. My team was flourishing, and I was kind of climbing that like corporate ladder at FutureShop. It was a crucible for me, I think. FutureShop. It was like seasonal sprints. We're desperately trying to hire, onboard, execute, hit sales projections. Right. It was where I learned about the real world, right? Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of friends at FutureShop. One of them ended up at BlackBerry, and I'd never have considered applying at BlackBerry. I thought maybe I would go and do, I don't know, some kind of web design or web development thing. But he pulled me in for a conversation with the manager, and I really didn't think it was going to work out. But he'd put his neck out on the line for me, and he was somebody that they trusted and respected there. And when they started the technical interview, I realized, like, I have the answers to these questions, and I don't know whether it was an imposter syndrome. There was no syndrome. I just hadn't thought about it until I was put on the spot. And so I rolled through a technical interview. I ended up taking on essentially a strategic technical. I was just a technical issues manager. And that role was super simple. I had a data science team, and that data science team was responsible for identifying and prioritizing issues. And if you're familiar with BlackBerry, it was like they had their fair share of issues.
Oh, yes.
So sometimes those issues were solved with code and sometimes process, but we were basically responsible for getting these cross-functional teams together and tracking down the problems and then putting that process or code in place.
Right.
So not much in the way of product chops at BlackBerry. I don't think there ever was, but they had some really, really great engineers. And those engineers took me from hacker to engineer. They helped put the polish on my skills. And we were using like Node 0.4, very, very early version of Node. We were using, shortly after that, I discovered Angular, and I started to kind of dive headfirst into the Angular community.
Cool. So was it BlackBerry that you got into JavaScript?
Yeah, man. So BlackBerry had this Hadoop system. You'd write a query, and you would wait a month for a response. So if you wanted to understand, if you wanted to know how the business was doing, you'd wait a month to hear about it. I mean, that's an extreme case, but they had all of the standard things you'd associate with an enterprise, right? It's like you want to get a VM set up. Well, then you put an order in with the IT group, and a couple of weeks later, it might get assigned to you. So I think I looked at Node because I was trying to figure out how I could do real-time analytics. I wanted the data to come in. I wanted to parse it. I wanted to do something with it. I wanted these dashboards that the data science folks were looking at to all be updated in real time. And Node was the way that I made that happen. So that was kind of my first step into JavaScript. And at the same time, I was getting like pretty frustrated with the culture in the enterprise. BlackBerry was starting to, honestly, like, I'd been there for their heyday, and they started to wind down a little bit. And at one point, they were kind of escorting my friends out the door, and I was known as like the local grave robber because I would go and grab all of their hardware and monitors, and I was building myself like a fortress of solitude inside of the BlackBerry building.
Oh, wow.
But I was also kind of on the side. The Halifax community was starting to take off. The Halifax developer community was starting to take off, and a couple of local companies had started to run hackathons. So I was going to hackathons all the time, and I met the crew that would later become my co-founders there. They had a company called GoInstant. GoInstant was doing this real-time collaborative these real-time collaborative user interfaces, and it was like early days WebRTC. Honestly, even before WebRTC, we were hacking the browser to make it happen. So I ended up kind of hopping from BlackBerry to becoming a full-time front-end developer at a startup. Shook my world a little bit.
Nice. So did you wind up going to Go Instant or just meeting them at the hackathons?
No, at those hackathons, hackathons have changed. Hackathons have changed. Like hackathons at this point in time, you weren't. I was talking to Sataria, one of our associates. She organized LA Hacks, one of the organizers at LA Hacks, and she was telling me that most of the reason people go to these hackathons is because they want to win and they want to put the fact that they won on their resume. Man, in my day, that is not what hackathons were like. You got together with a bunch of friends. You spent 48 hours like eating potato chips and building cool stuff. And then you all celebrated after, right? And you celebrated each other's wins. And I don't know when it changed, but it did. And these people, they became my friends. They contacted me shortly after and just said, hey, listen, we'd love you to come in and kind of go through our technical interview process. Which was pretty rigorous. It was, I don't know, 5 or 6 interviews, but it all kicked off just because I worked on the team with one of the folks that worked at Go Instant. So yeah, I joined them shortly after that.
That's really cool. And yeah, I mean, I've been to a couple of hackathons. Usually when I'm going though, I'm kind of just seeing what people are working on. I think I've been a participant in 1 or 2.
You're a celebrity now. You have to go and judge them. You don't get to participate anymore.
You know, it's funny. I haven't been asked to judge, but I've been to a few of them where it was, hey, look, can you cover it? Can you talk about the stuff that people are doing here? And, so I almost go as press more than anything else.
Interesting.
But yeah, it's interesting because, yeah, some of the folks are there and they're there just to have a great time and write some awesome code. And then you've got other people that are there and they're there to try and essentially they want to win and have a startup or win and put it on their resume or, somehow prove how awesome they are. And then, and anyway, it's just kind of fun and interesting to see, which teams seem to do well and the ones that are really enjoying themselves and, they're taking seriously what they're doing, but for the most part, they're there and they're there just because it's a cool place to be are generally the ones that do well in those anyway. Yeah.
I mean, I think sometimes the prizes can act as a bit of a negative incentive. It's they really work hard for the prizes, and sometimes they actually end up becoming more creative as a result because they know they need to use a specific combination of APIs, and so they try to figure out what they can build that will be useful with those APIs, and they come up with cool creative stuff. And sometimes it's not so great, but
yeah. But it is a cool part of the community, in my opinion. So
I think so too.
Fully supportive.
In fact, I am determined to bring back that low key 90s skateboard park vibe of hackathons. So yeah, if I manage to pull one together, you'll have to come and cover it as press.
Yeah, let me know. So one of the questions that I ask is what contributions do you feel like you've made to the JavaScript community? Oh,
cool. Okay. So, when I joined Go Instant, I mentioned that it was very, very early days WebRTC. It was very early days, with even like WebSockets were new at that point. And so Go Instant at that point, you're probably more familiar with Firebase. Firebase is still around and still serving developers.
Google bought them.
Yeah, Google bought them. So in the early days, Go Instant and Firebase, I'd like to think were neck and neck. We were competing for the same developers, and we were working on a lot of the same problems. And the tools that we were building were things that did real-time synchronization between the state you have in the client and the state you have on the server. And so a lot of those tools that we built, open source tools, they went with Go Instant to Salesforce, or when Go Instant was acquired, but they inspired the libraries. And honestly, a lot of it is probably even the same code base that you now see in libraries that do much the same thing with Firebase or Meteor. I have no idea how many. Hopefully that inspired some people. So that was probably the first thing. And then most recently, we built Taurus. And Taurus is one of the things that we realized when we were and honestly inspired us to build or to start Manifold. One of the things we realized pretty early on was that if we were going to start taking advantage of, if we were going to build smaller applications and we were going to start to use more cloud services, more services tailored towards developers, then we were going to have a lot more credentials that we had to manage, a lot more credentials that needed to be secure, that needed to be shared with our teammates, and that needed to be, we needed to be able to take those credentials and put them in our applications wherever they were running, whether that's a Docker container, on Heroku, wherever it might be. And so that's probably my most recent open source project. Taurus is something we launched towards the end of the year, and it's, the code base is open source and should hopefully check it out.
Awesome. What are you working on now?
So that Manifold is our latest project. We're trying to build a marketplace for developer services. How long has it been now? It's been 3 months. So we moved from Taurus to building Manifold earlier this year. The official launch hasn't even necessarily happened yet. That's hopefully to come later this year, September. If it is something that you want to try out and experiment with, I set up a coupon in our newly built explicitly for My JS Story. It was built this week, so we can issue coupons. We set up a My JS Story coupon that gives anybody that wants to go and give it a try before we launch a $25 credit that they can use to provision a logging instance or a monitoring or a database. You can use it for any type of service that you might need to build your app.
Awesome. And it's interesting. I don't know if I completely understood what Manifold was until I had actually gone and looked at the web page. But essentially what it does is it helps you monitor, as you said, cloud services. But just to give people an idea, some of the things that you've got listed here are Bonsai Elasticsearch or JawsDB with Maria MySQL or Postgres. You've got LogDNA, Mailgun. So, these are the cloud services that you would use to build your system from anything to the database all the way up to mailing systems like Mailgun, monitoring like Scout, just to give you an idea of some of the things that you can pull together. And it looks like you can get started for free, which is pretty cool because some of these services aren't free, and I don't know if they even offer a free tier, even if you want to try them out.
With credits, they're free. So that if you use the My JS Story coupon, you can try any of them out for free, even if they don't have a free plan. If we're missing something, if there's something that you believe should be there, then by all means, let us know. We'd love to add it. Or better yet, if you're building something and you want help taking it to market, that's the vision behind Manifold is really helping any developer who thinks they have something to bring to the world, to bring to other developers, something that's going to make other developers more productive, to give them a clear line of sight to that. Because I think there's a lot of us. One of the things we realized when we were building GoInstant was that we were really good at operating the technology, but building the business, that was an entirely different set of problems. So that's really what we want to help with. We want to help connect great developer services with great developers and great developers with great developer services.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm curious too. I know that you worked for a while in the development area on that. Now you're working more in the marketing or outreach area. I get asked by people sometimes. It's like, okay, so how much coding do you actually do nowadays, and how do you feel about that? So, yeah, I'm curious. How has this transition been, and do you do as much coding as you would like, and how does that all work out?
Yeah, so to be honest with you, until 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was the sole front end developer on the code base. So if you go to Manifold and you think it sucks, then you only have me to blame. That's all my fault.
It's your fault.
Yeah, it's my fault. The back end developers were fantastic. Our designer Nick Tassone, he used to be responsible for Heroku. He was creative at Heroku previously. A lot of our team is kind of ex Heroku, ex Red Hat. So there's until very recently it was all me, and now we're fortunate enough to bring some really talented front end developers on who will arguably do a much better job than I ever did. And so yeah, I've moved over to growth, and I think that's for developers that are thinking about starting their own company, that's the reality of it. It's you have to help out wherever you can, and Sometimes that's code that you're committing, and sometimes it's copy, and
Yep.
sometimes it's hopping on a flight and having a conversation with somebody on the other side of the world, and you just kind of have to be willing to pick up and take care of it.
Yeah, I definitely identify with that. I mean, when I started doing the podcast, it was something I did on the side while I was, doing coding contracts. And then it just got to the point where it was like, you know what, this needs full time behind it. And so my job became wrangling podcast editors and crap like that, and talking to sponsors and talking to, different people involved in, like I said, editing and writing show notes and doing transcripts. And man, I spend a whole lot more time managing other people than I do anything else.
Yeah. And I think the risk is that we lose sight of what we fell in love with to begin with.
Yeah.
And the way that I personally combat that is I make sure that I never stop looking at the problems of my day to day as problems that I can't automate. It's like if I think about the fact that I'm spending 20 minutes creating calendar invitations, and I'm doing that on a regular basis, then I start thinking about what I might be able to build that could automate that away.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of those skills as something that you just have to keep applying to the problems that matter to you in any given moment. And if you do that, then they stay sharp, and also you stay in tune. I think, anyway, that's worked for me so far. When I joined Heroku to build the developer relations org, that I felt it there more than anywhere. I went into developer relations at Heroku, and I was so in tune with what people were building and how they were building it, and why it was being built with those tools. And over the course of my time there, I guess a few years, it slowly, I just found myself building less and less and managing more and more. And I will say that one of the best things about starting this company was that I got to jump right into the code base and start building stuff. And I just locked myself into a room for honestly like 8 months while we built Taurus. Mm-hmm. And man, I gotta say, that was a hell of a lot of fun.
Yep. So I'm trying to think what the next thing that I usually ask is.
I knocked you off course. Do we get to do picks in this show? Do you have picks in this show too?
We do at the end, yeah.
Okay. Picks are my favorite part of your shows. I love the picks.
Awesome. So one other thing that I tend to ask people a little bit is, you kind of had this arc where you've gone, into code and then through code and into entrepreneurship. And I know people out there are trying to make that transition. They're trying to, say, hey, I've got this idea. I want to start it up. Maybe they're worried they don't have enough money or they don't have enough experience or things like that. Do you have any advice or just some general theme that you feel like you've kind of followed through your career that has led you to be able to, contribute to a company like Manifold and, get into this entrepreneurial point in your life?
And I'm no expert. I don't want to get up on a soapbox, but one of the things that I'll say that has worked for me is really identifying the people in your life and in your career that just make you better, that take you to the next level. Because I think a lot of people have that sense that they don't know enough to jump in and start a company, right? They don't. Right. Either they're not comfortable with marketing, or they're not comfortable with operations. They didn't know if they can raise money, or they don't know who to talk to. And in some cases, they try it anyway, and they focus only on what they're good at and what they know, and maybe that works out, and maybe it doesn't. But the reality is, it ignores your greatest resource, which is your friends, the people the people that you've worked with. And I think we're all kind of collectors. As we move through our careers, we find people who we love working with, right? Who have answers we don't have, who complement our skill set. And I would just say that if entrepreneurship is something that you're thinking about, starting a company is something you think about, the first question I would answer is, who is it that you want to do it with? Right? And what do they have that you don't? What do they bring to the table? Right. So that's probably the best piece of advice I could give.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because I recently reached out to a bunch of people that I know, and One of them that got back to me is one of those people. And he's like, yeah, let's get lunch. So we're going to get lunch on Friday. And then he basically said, oh, and I'm bringing on Nate, who's another one of those people for me. And it was just funny. It was like, man, I've lost touch with a lot of these people, and, they're right here in Utah, but, what am I missing out on with that? And
it's a long board. It's a long game on a short board. Right. It's like you see a lot of the same. There's a lot of the same players that come back into your life, and I mean maybe that's a good reason never to burn a bridge.
Yeah.
But it's also a good reason to stay in touch with people. And honestly, I find in our industry, it really takes some effort because it's just so easy to put your head down. And I'm as guilty of this as anyone, but put your head down and into a code base and disappear for a few months.
Yeah.
Right. And then you surface and everyone's just like, well, what happened to you? Where have you been? So putting the effort in and I mean, doing what you're doing and just grabbing lunch with people, having coffee with people. There's humans out there, we work well together. So.
Yep, absolutely. And it's funny too, because just by virtue of the podcasts, I feel like I've actually been that for people that I don't know. And so I've opened that up as well. If you go to devchat.tv/15 minutes, that's 15 minutes, you can actually talk to me for 15 minutes. And it's funny too, because people are like, I feel like I know you, and I listened to these conversations that really affected me, and I think in the same way, the work that you do on Manifold or Taurus, or the work that other people do on open source or in the communities that they're in, or organizing events or whatever it is, you can wind up having an impact and not really know it, and you're one of these people for somebody else.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the first times we talked, I told you that it felt like I already knew you because I'd spent so much time listening to you on JavaScript Jabber. And prior to that, I think the first podcast I was ever on was Node Up, and it was because we were one of the first users of Node in a funded startup. We had one of the first user groups around Node in Halifax. We'd done a successful hackathon, and we'd gone to like one of the very early Node events. And Dan Shaw, he interviewed me in Node Up, and it was just like, man, your community, and this is true for you too. The communities that we build, they touch people, right? And that just moves our whole industry forward. When people feel like they have a safe place that they can go and have a conversation about something they care about, and that just brings us all forward, brings us all up.
Yep, absolutely. Well, the last section of this is picks.
Have you ever felt like you're falling behind, or that the programming world is moving so fast that it's impossible to keep up? Then there's the issue of where to go to make sure you're up to date. The answer is to join a community dedicated to discussing the latest in JavaScript. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if you got JavaScript Jabber all day? Well, you can, kind of. We've created a Slack community for JavaScript Jabber. That means that you can connect with our listeners and guests on a platform you're most likely already using. Plus, we've set up a Keeping Current channel that pulls stories from across the web to help you know what people are talking about. And coming soon, we'll be holding monthly webinars and roundtable video chats to connect with experts in the community and with each other. So come join us at javascriptjabber.com/Slack.
Yes.
So do you have some picks for us?
Oh, absolutely. I thought of this as you brought up open source. I think we really rely on open source project, and part of my transition out of enterprise into the startup world was what happened as the result of every project I ever wrote until I was like in my 30s being locked down proprietary in a basement somewhere in a BlackBerry in a RIM building. And I hated that. I wanted to work on open source software, and I've had the opportunity and I love it. If you love open source and you depend on open source, and I bet you do, then you should give them money or you should give them time. And if you can't give them either of those things, then you should jump on Twitter and at least show them a little love. A great way to do that is through the opencollective.com. Open Collective is essentially a set of tools and services that help you support open source projects that you care about, and be completely transparent about the open source projects that you're currently working on. So you should check it out. They're a great bunch of folks. Another pick, just a straight up fun pick. If you haven't played with GraphQL yet, but you've been waiting to, because GraphQL is awesome and fun, and you should check it out. But it's hard to set up yourself. You should check out Scaffold. It's a online developer service. It's not currently available via Manifold, but I hope that at some point it will be. And it's a really easy way to get up and running with GraphQL.
Sounds great. It sounds like GraphCool, which is another.
Oh yeah, GraphCool is also a fantastic one.
Yep, and we've had those guys on the show. So
now I have to wind back and try to find that one and listen to it. That's one I missed.
Oh really?
Yeah, GraphCool. I've used Scrapple, but I haven't used GraphCool yet. So I'll have to give it a go and share my feedback.
Yeah, but anyway, it's just nice having those kinds of tools, especially the software as a service or platform as a service. I think some of these are more of like a service as a service, I guess. But they do a lot of things for us that, I mean, setting up Postgres and figuring out how to secure it, not really that much fun. I forgot this one stupid thing and then somebody hacked me.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you're setting up a lot of databases, if you're in the agency business and you've got clients and it's their data that's on the line.
Yeah.
I think the other thing about GraphQL in general that's really cool and that changes the game around platform as a service is that it's a protocol. Like it's something that if you build your application with GraphQL, then you're not as tied, you're not as coupled to any particular backend. So you can move from GraphCool to Scaffold without making huge changes, dramatic changes to your application. So I think that's a really good trend.
Yep, absolutely. So I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks. And you mentioned that programming is one of those tools that you wind up reaching for in order to do the kind of automation that you need to do, even when you're not dealing with code stuff.
Totally.
And, it kind of brought to mind a couple of things. And I know I've picked them on the various shows before, but I'm just going to pick a few of them again. One of them is AWS Lambda. There are others in like IBM Bluemix or Microsoft Azure, that all kind of do the same thing with like Azure functions and things like that. But yeah, you essentially have this function as a service, which makes it a microservice. I've actually heard people try and coin like pico service or nano service or something. But anyway, it's essentially right, but it's a function with an endpoint is what it is. And then they manage all of the access so that people aren't, abusing your function as a service with, whatever access you give it. And I've used that for adding people to Slack rooms. I've used it for, just kind of taking a really simple step that there really isn't a great automation for. And on a larger scale, I've used Zapier. So Zapier will connect to your AWS Lambda instances, and it'll do it in a way to where you just give it an IAM privileges, which is just the access management for Amazon AWS. And what you can do with that is essentially then you say, okay, send this data over to this function. You didn't expose any endpoints to anyone except for Zapier. And you just connect it up and send it through. So somebody signs up through some system on your website. It drops it into Zapier. Zapier does its thing, sends it off to AWS Lambda. Lambda talks to Slack, and off you go. And so, a lot of these things, it's kind of thinking of things at a higher level because it's how do I connect up these services? But at the same time, I mean, that kind of automation works really, really well. And it's funny too, because you mentioned, again, these business processes being programmed. And so what I figured out too is that level of specificity in just common documents on how to do a particular process also works out. So I'm not programming a computer. I'm telling somebody how to do a process that I need done. And it's something that, I haven't quite figured out how to automate yet. And so, yeah, I hand them off and,
you delegate it.
Yeah, and off it goes, right? And it just gets done. And so podcast editing and podcast show notes and things like that, it's like, look, this is how it's formatted, and here are the links that I need put in there, and here's how you get an Amazon affiliate link, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do that. And, and then I wind up building out tools. So I actually have a Heroku instance. I guess I'm picking all kinds of stuff, but I have a Heroku instance now that has a tool for my editor. And so what he does is after he finishes editing the episode, he uploads it to my hosting through CacheFly, and then he just takes the FTP link from CacheFly and drops it into this little tool in a text field, and it comes back and it says, okay, here is the link to the download link for the file. And so it generates that for him, and it puts it into an audio tag so that he can see, hey, look, the audio tag picked it up and it actually works. And so, that's just one of these next level things that I'm working on where it's, okay, we need to figure out, numbers for sponsors is one of the things that I want to figure out, right? So it's, I can essentially generate a report for the sponsor that says, you were in these episodes and this is how many downloads they got. Or, another one would be, here's the number of downloads that we need to use to calculate because I use a per 1,000 downloads model for pricing the sponsorships. And so again, it's like, okay, it goes and it connects to the services and then comes back and here are the numbers and here's how you update the Word document that we generate the PDF from. And so it's all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's a tool that I reach for. Sometimes it's a rather ramshackle, I guess, thing that I put together. Is not very polished, but it works.
Hey, at least you're still finding a way to write code once in a while. That's the important thing. We're still staying relevant. We're still keeping our skills sharp.
Yeah, barely. Yeah, but anyway, it's been a lot of fun just figuring those things out. One last thing that I'm going to just throw out there is that I've been doing a Udemy course on Ionic framework for building mobile apps, and that's been a lot of fun. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But yeah, one of the things I do to stay current is just go through these courses, and sometimes I buy them. This one was on sale for like $10. If you buy a course on Udemy, wait till it's on sale for $10.
Yeah, they're great at getting those in front of you. Every time I open Facebook, I'm signing up for another Udemy course that's just on sale, and somehow they knew I was looking at it.
Yeah, and then I have other courses that people bring to me and say, hey, would you like to be an affiliate on this or something? And so I check those out as well, especially if it's a topic that I was interested in learning anyway. And so I've got one from Dave Thomas on Elixir. Dave Thomas from Pragmatic Programmer. So,
and I think Elixir's really, maybe that should have been my third pick. I should have picked the language Elixir because I'm really excited about Elixir. I think there's a lot of really interesting things happening in that community. And having Ruby as a base in terms of community and being what's the VM it's built on, Beam, having that foundation in terms of technology, that's just a magic combination right there.
Yep. Well, and the other thing is, and I'm not going to belabor this too long, and we've already spent way longer on picks than we normally do, but, where I see things going with artificial intelligence, and it's artificial intelligence, AR, and IoT, Elixir, I don't see it playing a ton in AR or VR, though it does parallelize really well, and so some of the AR processing could be done in Elixir, I suppose. But machine learning and just being able to spin up multiple processes across multiple machines, and the way that Erlang VM handles talking to various processes.
Yeah, it's built right into the language.
Yeah, I can just see it taken off in Elixir. And then similarly with IoT, Elixir has some really, really interesting IoT frameworks that you can work in. And so again, I think there may be more future there than people really think about.
So when will the Elixir podcast be kicking off?
So I have this bad habit. I've been talking about a Kickstarter for a React podcast for a while, and I still haven't done it. So I'm planning on doing a Kickstarter for both React and Elixir shows here within the next month. So by the time this comes out, it'll probably have already been out there and closed.
Okay, great. So it's in the backlog.
Yes, it is. It's in the backlog. But the backlog is a lie. Anyway, I should do a show on that. Anyway, if people want to check out what you're working on now or follow you on Twitter or GitHub, what do they do?
Check out manifold.co. Again, use that My JS Story coupon for a $25 credit. You can follow me on Twitter at Matt_Creager. And I'm the same alias on everything else, GitHub and all of the other things.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Thanks for coming, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me, man. It's a pleasure.
All right. We will catch everyone next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.